Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at cmmsradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. Oh man, yeah. So speaking of which, gentlemen, I just want to ask about that because, like some of the other guests on CMMS Radio are military. They might even be active or in reserves, and that was a topic that came up as it relates to the facial hair. And like if you were looking like that and you were about to report back, it's gone, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's no exceptions. Nobody can have like a goatee, none of that crap.
No, you can have a C-stash.
Yeah? What's a C-stash? Is that the one that
just a mustache, but it can't go past the lip?
Yep.
And it's got to stay like high and tight. Most of the time, the guys only have it. It looks like it's like this.
Yeah.
It's for SCBA. It's so that you're a self-contained breathing apparatus, so you can do firefighting. That's the main, and don a gas mask.
Got it. Interesting. So, I was going to start off with a question today. I mean, obviously, I'll intro you guys, but I'm going to start off with a question, and this one is for you, Howard.
Oh.
What is a puddle pirate?
You know what? I have no idea.
Oh my God!
I that's one I have not heard. Hey, I was only in for 4.
Okay. All right. Let's kick that one over to Bryan.
Okay,
Talk to me, Bryan.
Full disclosure, Howard. I prefaced Greg with this one. All right.
Yeah.
A puddle pirate is someone who's in the Coast Guard.
No offense, anybody. We're just having a little fun. This is a very special episode.
I have to be nice to those Coast Guard folks, you know.
Hey, I love them too.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
yeah, they actually go overseas now, so you know.
Do they?
Oh yeah.
That's funny,
yep.
Man.
When I was doing some consulting for them back in the early 2000s, they were over in the Middle East.
Wow, that's good. Good for them, man. Getting after it. Maybe we'll extend that to be a lake pirate or something.
Yeah, there you go. Well, they definitely had. There are icebreakers up here in the lakes.
True. That's true.
Icebreakers. Well,
yeah.
Gentlemen, here we go. Little pause and a smile, or like that. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We've got a really special episode today. We've got Howard Penrose of MotorDoc LLC and Bryan Bieschke of Align Machine Company. And we're calling this episode Maintenance Sea Stories because these U.S. Navy veterans have seen a lot, and we want to hear all about it. Just in time for Veterans Day. Gentlemen, thank you for your service, and welcome back to CMMS Radio.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep, thanks for having us.
So today is really about gathering some of these stories. You're both maintenance and reliability professionals, bona fide maintenance and reliability professionals with lots of experience. I want to start off with, when you are in the U.S. Navy, what are some of the things that us as civilians don't understand about the maintenance protocols that are very unique to the United States Navy?
You're up, Howard. I'll go after you.
Well, I was actually in when we had stone tablets being used to create the 3M program, the maintenance management and something or other. I mean, that was right at the beginning where we had put together what would later become like what, your stations for CMMS, right? So we would have charts set up with schedules and completion and all that other neat stuff. I mean, we had to learn that as soon as you hit a ship, right? And this was in the 1980s. Of course, it became more sophisticated because, we started out the Roosevelt, the one I was on the first paperless ship. So as soon as we were, finished building her, they rolled on twice as many filing cabinets as they had on the previous ships. Just to take care of the paperless part. And we basically, it was say half of our work was maintenance.
And what about you, Bryan? How do you see it now and then, and kind of roll that up for us?
So Howard's got some time on me. So when I hit the carrier, we had a computerized maintenance management system. And like I told you, man, I don't remember what it was called, but I can tell you, work orders were called MAFs, maintenance action forms.
Yeah.
And they would be put out in a preventive capacity, and then also in a corrective or reactive capacity. So the preventive ones were put out by the department for all the routine maintenance that we needed to take care of, all the shipboard equipment or flight deck equipment in my case. And then when I would get called to the flight deck to troubleshoot something, of course I would come back and I'd fill out a maintenance action form in a corrective or reactive capacity. And I wish I could remember the name of it, but no, we didn't have tablets. We didn't have anything. It was all computer. So you had to go do the work on the flight deck, come back down, open your work order, or your MAF, close your MAF, fill it all out. And then they would run reports on them monthly, to see what our availability was, what our, open versus close, like pretty rudimentary or really fundamental metrics. There weren't really any crazy metrics that I saw or was involved in, honestly. Just keep everything running on the flight deck and don't let flight up stop.
Yeah. And you and I talked about that a lot, somewhat recently, where there's yellow shirts, there's blue shirts, and those are two really important things about the flight deck that people should hear about. Do you want to pick up on that, Bryan, and then we'll kick that over to Howard again?
Yeah. So colors, like we talked about, ship's company, which is shipboard assigned personnel who live on the ship. And then we talked about the air wing, which is a detachment of the carrier, right? So I'm going to talk about shipboard. So shipboard on the flight deck, you'll see yellow, blue, purple, green, and white running around for ship's company. And red. So blue is a chalk and chain, which is a flight deck handler helper. So they do all the chalking, chaining of the aircraft and helping with positioning of aircraft. Yellow are flight deck handlers. So they're doing all the direction and moving aircraft about. So the pilot is actually looking at them. They're doing hand signals to direct the aircraft around the deck. They'll assist in some chalking and chaining if you get behind or anything, but they're moving everything about the deck. Purple is aviation fuels. So they're doing all the fueling. Green is aviation bosun's mates. So they're doing arresting gear, catapults, any type of maintenance type stuff for the flight deck up there. And then you have red, which is aviation ordnance men or gunner's mates. Anybody's involved with ordnance or gunner's mates. I think fire control that came on the flight deck, I think they wore red too. Someone will correct me. And then white was safety personnel. And then once the air wing came on board, like I told you, I'm not even going to try to speak to what all those mean, but there's a ton of different other colors. They had shooters that had like a white and checkered color one. They had brown shirts. They had, all different types of stuff. So, and one thing to note on the flight deck, no one wore a rank. There was no rank. So I wore a flight deck Nomex, what do they call it? A turtleneck, long sleeve shirt. It didn't matter what the temperature was. You wore flight deck boots, long pants, and a Nomex long sleeve shirt with a float coat and a cranial. But you never had rank. When I was on the USS George Washington, no one had rank. So you didn't know who was a first class or a second class or a third class. Or the only reason you knew a chief or an officer is because they were wearing a khaki pant and not a camouflage pant. So that was the only thing you really knew. But the reason for that is they didn't want rank to get in the way of safety on the flight deck. They didn't want someone to not do the right thing because they were worried about authority in the other person. So essentially, if an officer is on deck and he's about to walk into the arresting gear and get killed, an airman E1 can run up and grab his by a float coat and throw him on the ground, and then everybody is going to yell at him. They didn't want that to get in the way. Yeah. So I think I have one flight deck shirt that has the rank on it, and it was just because we were taking pictures one day and our department wanted us to wear our rank.
Mm-hmm. So Howard, what is your experience with that? Because I think in your deployment, you're on a different type of vessel. Yes.
No, I was also on a carrier, but I was not an Airedale. I was down. I was a snipe. I was down below. I was also not nuclear. We were that gray area in between, right? So we had at the time. Now on the flight deck in the years I was in, they did wear rank. So they would all be stenciled in the shirts and stuff like that. Titles were also stenciled on the shirts, that kind of thing. But down below decks, we primarily had everything was done by a scheduler, set up by department. Like mine was EEO4, which was rewind shop. So we had to maintain our equipment, but then there would be generic assignments depending on what the workload was in other departments. Like EEO1 was power shop. So anything that was 480 volts, they did. So we would end up doing, steering gear and other things that were meant for the operation of the ship that were not the nuclear side. Now, the reactor department, those guys, they had insane PMs, but also the same structure. You had planners in each department. So we had electrical division, you had hull tech division, the same group that had hull techs. You had bosun's mates, you had basically machinist mates and any number of other things. Each of those would be divided up as to what their responsibilities were. So you always knew who was responsible for what maintenance. Mind you, we did it all on pen and paper. Like I said, we were supposed to be the first paperless carrier. We were far from it. I think for every data entry into a computer, we had to have triplicate versus duplicate. And then you had a storage department. Basically, everything we talk about companies should be doing, we were doing. Right. So when I got out, and then even if it said, okay, you need to go grease the winding machine, something as simple as that, we would have to go over there. We would have a card that went through every step, exactly which location, which screw you undid, how many turns, things like that. When I got out of the military and I went to a motor repair shop, I didn't have that. I mean, even when we were winding a motor, we had step-by-step instructions on everything that had to be done. So I get out and I go into the civilian world. I say, well, where are the instructions for that? And basically they kind of laughed. I mean, that is probably a big transition issue for a lot of military that are going into the civilian world and realizing there's nothing, everything that we were told was happening in the civilian world, and that's why we were doing it in the military, wasn't.
So that's a good jumping off point for one of the questions that I've had, like in the back of my mind, and I always love talking about this. So when you, and we'll start with Bryan. So when making that transition from the military into, civilian life or private sector, whatever we want to call that, is it really challenging when you have all this military background and experience with how to kind of do the fundamentals extremely well, and then you get into this other environment and people just don't get it, they just kind of miss it? Is that a challenge, Bryan?
Yeah. So like Howard was saying about his different numbers for all his shops and things like that. So I was in AIMD, Aviation Intermediate Maintenance Department, right? So my particular shop was IM4, Intermediate Maintenance Shop 4. And then above intermediate maintenance was depot level repairs, meaning the Navy pretty much outside contracted all depot level stuff. So there's levels of different, what we would call level of repair, right? So I was being a troubleshooter, you got your hands into a lot of things more than anybody else would, just because of the needs of what you were doing on a day-to-day basis, right, on the flight deck. But when I got out of the service, I went to work for Caterpillar. So I got hired by Caterpillar while I was still in the service. And then I got out of the service, I transitioned there. So fortunately for me, Caterpillar was pretty robust in a sense, right? They had SysWeb, which is all the information system for all the work. It doesn't tell you quantity of grease, number of bolts, things like that, but it does have really good pictograms and things. So I was a pretty easy transition into that. But I can say that I have recently had some people who were working for me that transitioned out of the military, and they came to me with a lot of questions like, oh, where's the tool crib? Where's this? Does the instructions have every single tool on it? Blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Okay. Like there's a level, like even if you're at a pretty well-built, like outside the Navy or outside the military maintenance program, there's still a level of independent thinking that you have to be successful. Right. And for me, I know like for Howard too, probably like there was so much structure, but because of the intricate things we were doing, we had a level of independence where we had to really be thinking outside of the instructions. Right. So like I said, I had guys come to me and they're asking me all these questions, and I'm like, look, man, we have this, but we don't have that. No, I don't have a tool crib attendant who receives your math and signs it off and allocates all your tools to your work. Like we don't have that. But like one step forward from Howard was saying, so with our work instructions, the first thing was you had to get approval to do the work. And then you had to go to the tool crib and there was a list of tools and you had to sign out all your tools that were associated with the job and consumables and even down to the Q-tip. Like it would say 1 Q-tip and you go and you sign out a Q-tip and then you go do the work. And he's right. It was like grease this 4 pumps, turn bolt 3.5 degrees, 20 foot-pounds. Like it was wild. So getting out of the service, I saw a little bit of that with Caterpillar. But like I said, I didn't experience that too much, but for people I've had come out and work for me, they've been culturally shocked big time. So I had to help them transition into that.
Makes sense. I mean, we would expect that. I want to hear you guys say it instead of me doing a bunch of guesswork. So for you, Howard,
I went through the same type of thing. I came out and I went to a motor repair shop. Mm-hmm. It was interesting because I was involved in rewriting the motor repair manual in the Navy. I got to put in some of the edits and so on. And one of the areas that we were looking at was the motor repair shop I ended up going to work for, because I was like, oh boy, they're going to be really close. And they offered me the job a year before I got out of the Navy. So the last day I was in, I had a choice: sign up and go to Keflavik, Iceland for physical security, or, leave. So I left and went to the repair shop and realized very quickly they didn't have anything remotely like that. First off, you had to go buy all your own equipment. That was a shocker. Then the second thing was there were no instructions on anything at the time. I mean, ISO 9000 and all that stuff hadn't started then. So it was basically you were a tradesman. You had to understand your trade. You had to figure it out. In the military, as Bryan said, we did have to do a lot of independent thinking when we were missing stuff. You had to get a waiver each time. I mean, I knew the captain intimately of our ship, of an aircraft carrier, 6,500 people, right? I knew him intimately because we had to get waivers on equipment for every time we did a motor repair, and I was required to walk it up to the bridge to get the sign off. And it was because literally equipment was not delivered to the vessel that was supposed to be there. Things like, I don't know, vibration equipment, field balancing stuff, and those are interesting stories. And even some of the equipment, we were basically having to design our own equipment and then including that in the waiver. So I forget the name of the form. There was a form we had, and you would design it. You would say, this is what it is, put in the details, and then that went up with the repair package.
So when you talk about all that and then you compare it to kind of when you're not in the military and you're in these different environments, is there a really big difference in, say, for example, the nomenclature, the way you describe work or the way you call something out? How challenging is that to, let's say you're in charge, for lack of a better word, and you're in a maintenance planner or above type role, right? Like you're running teams and helping them. Does that become a real challenge early on, like the nomenclature and the way you describe things? And we'll start with you, Howard.
Yeah, when people would start talking to me without using acronyms, I'd get all confused.
Yep. Yep.
And
They'd say this doesn't work, and then finally I converted that over to FUBAR.
oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah, there were quite a few things in transition. I had names for things, and the tradespeople had names for things that were different than what I used. Eventually, by using a level of experience I had above everybody else, because there were holes in my ability to do things autonomously at first, the ability to still make decisions, right? So I wanted instructions. How do I do this? And I had to fight through that. That was the tough part. That was probably a year, right? And then I started advancing through the company. I mean, I had to leave at one point. I'd been there for 2 years because I wasn't seeing any direction. I went and ran a repair shop in Richmond, Virginia for almost 2 years, and then was called back to the other place to be a manager there. So all of a sudden, all the people that were working for me had to learn my terminology.
Challenging, right? So,
but really, other than that, I mean, we had different names for certain tools. A lot of them wouldn't be PC these days.
Can we get one or two of those names of tools that are
side cutter was called a dike.
Okay.
I mean, I think sitting down at the table at the SMRP conference when Bryan and I started having a little chat, I looked around because we fell right into our speech, and I know I offended at least 2 people. But sorry, I mean that's the the training we had, right?
Right. Right.
The connection box on a motor being called a peckerhead. Once in a while, I hear that these days, and it's always somebody with gray hair. Just really kind of off color things that were said that weren't meant to be what was being said. And oh no, I hope this doesn't happen.
Yeah. So I'm
reconnected. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were good. You're good.
Real quick, I want to switch it over to Bryan, but I'm going to change the question.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, Bryan, within the military, what's a shitbag? And give me an example with a short story of what a shitbag does or doesn't.
Okay. So the first thing I'm going to say, and I think I told you this, Greg, so we don't even have to cut it from the other video. When I say shitbag, I'm not taking anything away from somebody who we lost Howard.
Yeah.
Who has the courage to sign the dotted line,
hey, hon.
Giving the United States government everything up to and including their life. Okay. So I'm not taking anything away from that. But in the Navy, there were people who we would call skaters, shitbags, and these were people who weren't squared away. Either they weren't dependable on to do the job function correctly, or when you were a part of a work detail in port and doing something, you knew they were going to disappear and you would have no help, right? So a skater, a shitbag is essentially somebody who is not interested in doing the work. They're interested in creating an easy way to do whatever it is. And a lot of times that means not being around or hiding or overall not being good at their job. Again, not taking anything away from their decision to join the military. It takes tremendous courage to do those things. But anybody you talk to in the service is going to know one of those people. And I'll give you a perfect example. So when I joined the Navy, I dropped out of special warfare. I failed the runs. I'll own it 100%, right? I couldn't complete the physical tasks because it kept getting harder and harder, and I dropped out, right? But when I went to the needs of the Navy, I went into the air department on the carrier. And in port, we take care of the flight deck. So we paint the catwalks. We paint like nobody's business. We paint so much. So every day we would be given a task. We would start painting catwalks, or we would paint stairwells, or we would put lines on things, just really, really fundamental tasks. Well, you knew that if you were in a group of certain people, you'd probably be the only guy out there painting that day. And then miraculously, those dudes would show up, or ladies would show up when the supervisor or your LPO or somebody came around. It's like, I don't know how they knew, but or they'd cover themselves in paint and be like, look, I was painting. But that's what I mean, right? So I painted a lot of catwalks, a lot of scuppers, a lot of ladder wells, and I was by myself or with 2 or 3 other people most of the time, and there was a group probably of 5 to 10 assigned to each spot, and people would disappear. They don't want to do it, right? I did it. I did it because it was expected of me, and if Howard was on here right now, he would tell you that the last thing you want on a carrier is to have a bad name.
Right. Right, because you never live it down.
No,
right?
It's like being in a small town, right? I mean, if you live in a small town of 5,000 people and you're known as the guy who's not great, everyone's going to know you're the guy that's not great, right? And then on the other side of that, if you're really, really good, people will know you're really, really good. So,
much better way to be known, right?
Much better way to be known.
So, we'll change it up again. So when we're talking about these maintenance C stories, can you give me a story around a maintenance, something that represents kind of like a horror story, something kind of unexpected, and then what the end result was?
All right. So I was working on elevator 3, which is behind the island, and directly behind the island is where the crash and salvage crane is, and a lot of the crash and salvage equipment is. And also behind that, between L3 and the crash and salvage equipment, is what we called like the boneyard, the junkyard. And that's where the ABHs, who were the yellow shirts and blue shirts, would put broken pieces of equipment like tow bars, chains, chocks, carts, and things like that, right? So they'd put them there, and we would go through them, and we would know what we needed to work on. There he is. So I was on elevator 3, and we wear a cranial, and as you're a flight deck troubleshooter, you have a radio and you have a headset connected to the 1MC, or sorry, the 5MC. The 5MC is the flight deck announcement. The 1MC is the shipboard announcement. So anything that comes over the 5MC, you hear in your cranial, which is generally coming from a guy called the handler, who's a high-ranking officer. He's in charge of every movement on the flight deck. In my particular case, on the USS George Washington, although I had a good rapport with him because I did my job well, he was a tough dude. He was old school Navy, tough dude. Anyway, so I was on elevator 3 working on an MSU, which is a mobile starting unit. It's essentially a small jet engine in a crate on the back of a tractor. It's used to create high pressure air that they plumb into propped aircraft to start the props. Well, it's got 2 bifold cabinets on it, and I'm working on it. And I hear on my radio, heads up L3 spinning a rhino. Well, that means everybody on L3, watch out. We're about to turn a bird, exhaust facing you, and you're either going to get blown down, burned, or get out of the way. So the first thing I did is I went, okay, well, I just ducked behind the MSU cabinet because it's not going to blow the tractor over. Well, I forgot that the bifold door was facing the jet engine, and it blew the bifold door down onto my hands, and it broke both my pinkies. So I got 2 broken pinkies, and they were splinted, and I was off the flight deck for just a little bit. The reasoning is because I couldn't put a flight deck glove on. You have to wear gloves when you're on the flight deck. But as soon as I could, I expedited that process because there was no way I was losing my position as a flight deck troubleshooter. So someone was interim up there. I don't remember how long it was, like a week or 2, while my hands were getting better. But yeah, I wasn't losing that spot. But that's what happened. There's a bunch of those. I tore my PCL on my knee in the Navy. Same thing. I was trying to put a tractor tire on during flight ops, and I was dumb, and I squatted down to pick this big ass tire up, and it squatted and rotated, and I blew my PCL out on my knee. Yeah, just dumb things, just trying to get it done.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you needed Howard for that tire.
Right. Howard's a bona fide power lifter.
Yep.
Yes, this I learned from some of our discussions. So I want to kick the same question over to you, Howard. And what I'm looking for is a funny, interesting kind of story as it relates to some kind of a maintenance event while you were, there on a ship or whatever it might be. And then, what was the outcome? Just something like that.
So MotorDoc, by the way, is the nickname given to me by the Captain Purcells of the Theodore Roosevelt when I was 19. So my first great experience and kind of a funny story that started kind of a bit of a legend. I mean, I had the only dedicated motor repair shop in any aircraft carrier in the Navy for the time that I was in. So the first one started out, the mess decks ran into trouble. Nobody was available from the appropriate, electrical shop. So I was called. I was in central control, and I ended up running up to the mess decks, and they said, our freezer, all the lights are out. So I go down the stairs, and the officer's behind me, and I lean against the first light going down, and all the lights turn on. So I turn around and I said, what's the issue? And he's just looking at me aghast. So that night I got a group from my shop, and we went down and fixed the wiring and the lights.
Were they in series, Howard, or parallel?
A couple of them were wired up in series. So it affected the whole area. And those freezers were gigantic. I mean, we're talking about, at the time it looked like a football field. I'm sure it wasn't quite that size, but pretty close. Then that was followed by almost immediately by a call where we had just pulled out of the shipyard, and the captain called down because the ventilation next to the admiral's cabin was vibrating and making a lot of noise, and they had guests aboard. So I called the roving person, and he didn't respond. Found out later he had drifted off in the aft steering. It was a mid-watch, so it was early in the morning.
Skater.
Yeah, after midnight, between 12 and 4. So I went ahead and had the one of the other watches stand my watch, so they handled the phone calls, and I went up and tagged out the fan. Went down to my shop, grabbed a book, put it in my back pocket, went up, opened up the door to the fan, took the empty Coke can out, tossed it in the garbage, shut it, locked it, sat down and read a book for, good half hour, and then went back down, tagged it all in, and the vibration went away. Well, all of that was because an officer, the chief engineer, had signed for equipment being in the repair shop, including balancing equipment that was not. So, I got some favors for that. So, you never, ever want to put your boss or anybody that works under you in a bad position. So the roving guy owed me some pipe tobacco, and the officer made sure I had a full weekend when we hit Fort Lauderdale during spring break.
Nice.
Ooh, wow.
Oh, that's a whole other set of stories.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that one on another episode, because that could be a continuation where we go from sea stories to maybe a little bit of what do we call that when you get it's like a weekend pass or something like that? What is that called?
Shore leave.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, shore leave is part of the whole thing. I mean, you cannot talk about being at sea and shore leave. Yeah, the adventures are quite interesting because you basically have a whole bunch of the average age on board the Roosevelt when we first went to sea was 19 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, we won't get into it right now, but CMMS radio is kind of focused on not just computerized maintenance management
Yeah.
software, but maintenance management and kind of pulling from these incredible stories. I think we could all probably agree that there's some maintenance going on there, but it's of a different type. So we'll do that on another episode.
Not quite what
And
I meant, but yeah,
yeah,
the whole thing was that you had a whole bunch of 19-year-olds that were responsible for their own lives, right? Because
And they had money.
forgetting a serious maintenance situation, let's say CHT pumps, right? That's the sewage pumps. It not properly maintaining those meant everybody suffered. And you couldn't just say, okay, well, we'll jump next door to the McDonald's and go there. No, you or order a porta potty. You can't do that when you're at sea.
So,
right.
Greg, let me segue just for a sec, just
Yeah.
because Howard wasn't on the other half we did a couple days ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Howard, I was very clear with Greg when I said, like, and you make a great point, like, you can't just go do whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
I was very clear in saying, like, a differentiator between a lot of veteran, like, military people, particularly in the Navy, being on shipboard, you don't have a choice.
Yep.
There is no, like, oh, maybe I'll get to fixing that generator, or oh, maybe I'll get to fixing that motor, or maybe I'll get to fixing that crane. There is no choice. You do it and you execute it and you do the right thing and you get it done, because the amount of risk and stuff that comes along with not doing your
Yep.
fundamental role is huge. It's not like when you're at like a manufacturing plant where it's like, oh, I might just wait till tomorrow to do this PM, or I might just wait till tomorrow to do this, whatever. It's like, no, you can't do that. You will get, if someone catches you, you'll get your head stomped in. But if your own team, your own work shipmates catch that you didn't do it, you're going to get your head stomped in, right?
Yeah.
It's that serious.
So let me put it this way. Does anybody, do you remember when the wall came down? And you know what I'm talking about, the Berlin Wall. 1987?
That's a great question. I'm 35.
Yeah, there you go. So I was in during that period. So in 1986, we did a North Atlantic cruise, right? It was part of our shakedown and everything else. And which it was 3 months. And we had the Russian Navy doing their stuff nearby, and we were in the other end. And aircraft to aircraft interactions were not unusual. Now they make it a big deal in the news, but it was almost a daily occurrence for us. And it didn't make the news because it was normal, right? So I get this call saying, hey, we got a motor repair and we can't give it to the tender because it's too important. We want it to come to the Roosevelt, to your repair shop. And I said, what is it? And he said, the long range radar motor for the Ticonderoga. Now, to put this into perspective, we're talking about a motor about this big, right? It's a 2-speed motor. And it literally took care of the air coverage for the fleet, for our battle group. So they Harrier it over to us. So there's nothing cooler than getting delivery via Harrier. And that's when I learned to like coffee. Because I was up for 72 hours, not just rewinding it, but somebody had come down because it was so important while I was on watch and told a fireman apprentice to take the windings out, which he did with pliers, leaving no information. So I had to then get on a satellite call. And it was an engineer from General Electric, because the company that built the motor was no longer in business, and they had not left the drawings like they were supposed to per whatever agreement with the military. Yeah, if you sell an electric motor to the Navy, you're required to provide all the winding data. So there was no winding data. So I had this person, and you couldn't tell male or female, who I was talking to. I met her later at GE during something else. But in any case, she taught me how to design a motor on paper. So we had to design the motor from scratch in order to get the thing up and running. To make matters worse is, as always, people always follow the rules on the civilian side of storage before filling up a ship. We had 90 tons of copper wire, all of which was bad, meaning they had put other heavy equipment on top of all of our spools of wire before it went out to the ship. So I'm at sea with bad wire, so we'd have to test individual coils. That's where I learned the importance of testing. Right? We had to test the individual coils while we wound the motor. We sent it out the first time it blew up, came back. We had to, well, we didn't have a test center that we were supposed to have, right? And so we rebuilt it again, and that time it went out and worked. But during that period of time, I was continuously reminded by senior officers, including an admiral, that it was costing us $100,000 per aircraft that was up to do the same air coverage as the Ticonderoga.
Wow, just such a small yet critical component.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real example of criticality, because I think people use that a little too much, especially in the.
I dealt with a call the other day where I was told, hey, we need to work on this because it's an environmental motor, and if it goes down, we're going to be fined, $50,000 per whatever. And I'm going, okay, but is anybody going to die? I mean, the priorities are a little different. So yeah, definitely in the military, when during times of high stress between countries, we'll just put it that way. And when you have adversaries that literally are taught, I mean, just like we were, the meetings they have now, because I got to sit in a few as a consultant, the meetings they have now concerning our adversaries and the meetings we had in the 1980s where communism was absolutely evil. And, some of the stuff they would show was like, we know better now, but it was definitely propaganda. It was all to keep us wired to, do what we had to do should the worst happen. Right.
Sure.
And we were seriously, constantly in fear that at some point there would be a nuclear weapon brought into play.
Yeah.
And we were told that right from the beginning, kind of a little different, than going out on a service call now and worrying about the neighborhood you're going to be in.
Sure. So, I want to kick it back over to Bryan now, because, while you're telling that story, I'm kind of looking over and seeing what's going on up in his head. So I think he had an idea or two, not necessarily about that, but you were thinking about something, Bryan.
Well, I was thinking about is how, when something is, look, I'm going to talk about criticality real quick. And Greg, you had mentioned like people who throw that term around. Yeah, they do, right? Just because you have a CMMS and something says P1 or P0, it's super important. Like it might be, okay. There's a huge difference when there's $80 million of aircraft in the sky. Your tax dollars are paying for it. The minute, your radar jamming or radar cover is not working anymore. I mean, that's like, get your pump with some vibration sensor on it out of here. Like, it's nothing, right? But I think context is so important when thinking about the criticality of it. And so many people have this, like in the civilian world, they have this like blinders on. They're like, oh my God, if this $18 valve stops working, it might cost $1,000 worth of downtime, right? It's like what Howard's talking about, and what I'm thinking about, like thinking about the Tilly crash and salvage crane having to be operational no matter what, or every MSU on the flight deck having to be operational all the time, every firefighting piece of equipment like the P25 fire truck and all these things. Like 5 minutes of that thing not working, someone is literally yelling at you through your cranial, and the repercussions of it not working, because one of two things is going to happen, because they're not going to just go, oh, he got it running, it's fine. No, he's going to go, when was the last service? When was the last PM? They're going to go to that guy's chief and down in that shop and go, why did this break? What was the outcome? Did you do your services? Let me see the documentation. Why did it take your guy a half hour to fix it when it should have taken 30 minutes? Why didn't you have that part in your shop when they had to go down to logistics to get it? Like, there's just so much behind it. And the implications of it is real deal, right? If the crouch and salvage crane didn't work and an aircraft just happened to miss the arresting gear and smash into the flight deck or something, right? Like, take the money away from it. Sometimes there's 4 people in an aircraft. If it's an EA-6B Prowler or something, there's 4 pilots in there. If it's a Baby or a Rhino F-18, there's 2 pilots in there, right? So the order of magnitude is very, very different. Right now, say it happens, and in Howard's circumstance, you're in a war zone. Now you have a U.S. aircraft crashed on a carrier in a war zone. Now your flight deck is essentially out of commission. You can't launch aircraft. You can't recover aircraft. Now you've put everybody in the sky at risk until that is moved out of the way.
Yeah, worse, you put your country at risk, because that is the number one way of projecting power for the United States.
Carriers are no joke.
Yeah,
they're no joke.
No.
Yeah. So this kind of gave me a different question in my mind. So that level, so context matters in a way we can't even describe with words. And then when we take these experiences and now we move back into, I'm going to say civilian life, private sector, whatever the hell you want to call it. Should maintenance operations in organizations take their processes and these things when it comes to context more seriously than they actually do? Or are they at a disadvantage because of all the excessive corporate structure that kind of goes against that? Does that question kind of
I get the question, because it's an area that I in particular have focused on for my career, right? But the key that I see is that with the loss of communication between your maintenance organization and leadership, which starts on both sides, right? We audited back in the day. We audited some of the MBA courses, right? So everybody who moves up through management, somebody there has an MBA, or they've gone to some version of business school where they teach maintenance as a cost and an inconvenience, or worse. And most of the classes we looked at, like Wharton School, it literally spent all of its time on the maintenance side discussing how to negotiate in contracts. Yeah, it was insane. I think there was a paragraph related to maintenance, and if I lose connection, I'll connect back up. It looks like I'm out.
We're gonna have to continue that story.
And it looks like I'm back.
So we're gonna be doing a lot of editing.
Give it a second.
Hey, Howard's worth it.
Speaking of maintenance,
right? I've got an episode right now that's in post-production that we did, and it's pretty incredible. And I'm so thankful for, both of you making the time and the time previously to be on, CMMS radio. It's pretty interesting to me to see kind of the differences, the similarities between military life, the approach to maintenance and maintenance operations. I'm going to call it that, and then for me, I've got this experience with like buildings. I'm always concerned about the building envelope and then what's happening inside the building. So if it's manufacturing equipment, I want to take all my knowledge and try to understand what they're trying to do there. But I really see some big advantages when you have, let alone CMRPs involved, but those that have military backgrounds. There's some really strong advantages to that in my mind. And, with this one being kind of a special episode that we want to, say to all of our veterans, thank you for your service. Remember the fallen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I've said it before, anybody, whether it's at the Starbucks or wherever you get your coffee or whatever, you see somebody wearing a hat like this one that Bryan's wearing or what Howard was wearing. I've even got one that somebody gave me a long time ago, and I'm very careful about wearing it because I don't want people to think, hey, were you a Marine? And I would say, I wish, but I know a boatload of them. And, no pun there, but, with the U.S. Navy, sometimes you're considered the taxi service for the Marines, and the Marines are the first in, so to speak, when it comes to, getting in the shit and all that kind of stuff. I just, what I was talking about, Howard, is just, kind of the significance of military background when we look at maintenance operations, and how I think that's a big advantage for organizations out there when they can look at, say, for example, veterans that are looking for gainful employment. These are the kind of people that most of the time you want as part of your maintenance operations because they actually get it because they had to, right?
No choice. Discipline.
Yeah, the discipline alone, right? So, I mean, I can walk into any maintenance shop and say,
and that's a help to you, right? If you have to accomplish something,
half the hands will go up. Oh yeah, it's huge. We're all talking the same language. I mean, boot camp, for instance, is there to tear you down and then turn you into all the same people, more or less, right? It's a level of experience where you've been torn down to nothing, you're built back up, you're built all back up the same way. I mean, if you look and people will say to an average Navy guy, not a Marine, but an average Navy guy, and we're allowed to say that. Nobody outside of the military can make fun of other people in the military. Only people in the military. Yeah, that's the way it is. But in any case,
that's okay. That's okay. It's really
the level.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I distracted myself.
The level of
I'm getting frustrated with the maintenance
is
from Comcast.
Right? I was at SMRP, and I met JD Solomon for the first time in person. And talking to him, 5 seconds into the conversation, he goes, "Were you in the military?" And I'm like, "Yes, I was in the Navy." So, like, not everyone, but there's 9 times out of 10, there's a demeanor, a certain attitude, persona given on, whether good or bad, right? That sometimes you can tell if someone was in the service or not. And it really comes down to, like, if you're hiring somebody, like, they might not know everything, because sometimes some maintenance rates, they kind of are handicapped in the service because they're really only allowed to do certain things, right? So if they don't have, like, if you're expecting to hire some like crazy genius maintenance guy, that might not happen, because some of them are at different levels of the maintenance strategy within the military, right? They may be a guy who just services Humvees, and that's what he does, or he services light armored vehicles or something, right? So if you're like, oh, why don't you know how to troubleshoot with an oscilloscope? It's like, well, dude, I don't even know what an oscilloscope is. I was never trained to use that.
Cue the Humvee picture. All right, that's it. Carry on.
So, but what you will get normally is someone who, if you task them with something and you explain to them why it's important and the repercussions of what it is, you're probably going to get a good outcome, because they understand. They understand in the means of having to do to eliminate risk, or having to do to save a buddy, or having to do to protect something, right? And maintenance is just that. We're there to maintain integrity of things, right? So, great, exactly. Yeah, like,
and an attention to detail.
Like how we're saying boot camp, just down to your uniform.
Yeah.
Just down to your, we call it a rack, but that's the bed you sleep in, okay? So on a ship, you open the rack and your stuff is in your rack, right? In boot camp, all of that has a specific spot, place, fold type, location, everything. And it's inspected every single day. And if one of those little things is off, they will throw all your shit out of it, all over the berthing, and then you'll do it again.
Now,
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and plus
This
your
is
whole
really
group will
important,
get
right? So
push-ups and sit-ups.
this is
Yeah.
I'm curious because there's a really really big outcome through these kinds of practices that can be achieved with an individual, right? Where I'm not talking about they automate in a sense that they almost like they don't think about it, but it's like making a machine because you want the ultimate reliability in the individual to carry out the reliability that's necessary for people to survive, for places to be safe, all these types of things. Yeah. So through that, breaking them down and then making sure that's where those basic fundamentals that Bryan talks about that a lot. You have to do those extremely well. They have to be somewhat automatic, but you understand why you're doing it. Is that part of the reason that's so, like, a lot of us might say, damn, that's brutal, that's ruthless, and you guys are saying no, it's not, that's life-saving?
It's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's necessary. And more to Brian's point is the key is that if you do hand it off to that person, it's not, you know, in the military, we figured things out. If we didn't have the tools, we developed the tools. If we needed to fix something and what was not, stuff that wasn't there, we created what was necessary to do it. We had machine shops and everything else to do that. But it wasn't backyard mechanic fixed. It was fixed to the best of our ability. I mean, to spec, right? So if we didn't have a fuse of a certain size and there was a different fuse, there was a process for making that modification that had a prompt that was put in place so that it was fixed to the correct point later on. I mean, you had to keep the battle readiness, but making sure everything was to spec was that much more important, because if it wasn't to spec and you went to war, then that one thing could sink the ship, right? That's basically what we were
Right.
taught. That one
Right.
thing you didn't
So-
do could cost lives.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. I don't have just like an automatic response for that. I think people have to really take that in and then figure out, how do we apply that in the real world?
Well, I'll take it a step further. So somebody will come and they'll ask me, we'll go and we'll test something, for instance, and they'll say, well, how long is it going to last? I don't shrug my shoulders and say, I don't know. You weren't allowed to do that. You had to provide context or an answer of some type. Like, there's this chance it'll survive this long. Oh my gosh, the ship's been heavily damaged. What do we do? Oh, how long is it going to take to repair? 3 weeks in Subic. I mean, it was, oh, you're too young. But it was, you had to provide an actual answer, and not providing an answer, even in highly stressful, I mean, when we ran general quarters drills, those were still highly stressful. They were almost as if you were in battle. So when we'd run the GQ drills, they would, and you would have pretend, I mean, literally, there's a fire there. Well, there isn't a fire there, but we all had to imagine there was a fire there. And you had to take every step you would take as if there were a fire there, even simulated injuries. Oh, this is the main guy. He's taking leadership. You're out.
Yep.
You're dead. Who's the next one to take over? And if you didn't have those answers and you couldn't respond to, what could be done to get everything back up and ready to fight, because that's what it was all about.
Right.
Get the ship ready to fight. You didn't belong in that position, which does bring up one other point. And it was a question that was asked during a sailor of the quarter thing. And I got a pat on the back for my answer, but I was admonished by the captain. And he said, well, you're from engineering. What's the most important department on the ship? And I said, the flight deck, the Airedales. That's what we're out to do. We're out to cover them. And he goes, no. He says, you're absolutely wrong. every single department and every person on this carrier has equal importance. If they did not, they wouldn't be here. So when we're talking about lean everything in the civilian world, in the military, you had the basic to do your job. You had exactly what was necessary to do the job, no more, well, sometimes less, but supposed to be no less. And you had to work within those constraints. So when I go to companies and they say, well, we don't need this and we don't need that. And it's like, well, why are they here?
Point of like Greg mentioned it, but like that I try to drive home with people is fundamental excellence, right? And it's, I knew some submariners who were, the propulsion systems on submarines are very simple. I don't want to say they're old, right? I don't know. He didn't tell me too much because he can't, right? But he just said that everything is super simple, super repeatable, low risk, and readily available. Like everything. And all the maintenance they do isn't some crazy. It's like, no, it's very fundamental, precise maintenance. In the civilian world, everyone wants to get complicated. But if you look how the military runs, look, I'm not going to say there isn't a bunch of waste and there isn't all sort of stuff, right? There is, okay. But if you look at the fundamentals of how we do maintenance, and any maintenance people in the military listen to this will understand this. Like, we're not doing crazy stuff. We're doing the excellence of the fundamentals that need to happen to ensure that this thing performs its intended function, not performs its intended function and does cartwheels and 14 backflips associated just because we think it should and it's really, really cool and everybody else is doing it. In the civilian world, you get I know Billy who just put a whole bunch of vibration sensors on his pumps and now he's got big data and he's going to save $1 billion with his big data and everything, right? So I have to do it too. So it's like when I go into maintenance departments, we're focusing on core culture, which is like when I come in, I'm kind of a culture shock when I meet people because I'm very passionate and I'm very direct. So I build culture and I build the fundamental excellence. What do these things need to tick? Not what do these things need to go 1,000,000 miles an hour? What do these things need to tick? Anything above that is later.
Well, and more so, I mean, when you're talking about some of the new stuff that's coming out, what is it for? What does it do? What does it accomplish? I mean, I was just going through a report today for a project we're involved in, and they're talking about a mass of memory required for IoT devices and 55.2 billion of them that was supposed to be in 10 years happening within the next 2. And a level of memory to be used that will put data centers and stuff like that into 5 to 10% of the total energy consumption of the planet. I mean, this is ridiculous. What do we use those for? I remember at one government facility that I was doing work for a while, and we were taking in 39 million data points per day for the site. And when the data guys came down to talk to me, they said, what makes the decision on whether or not this motor comes out? And they start showing me pages of data they were getting. And I looked at them, I said, vibration and temperature. That's it. That's literally no matter what I put in front of the chief engineer for the facility, he turns around and he says,
what's interesting about that for me as you're talking about it and what you were saying, Bryan, and what's like a really big theme these days where it's almost like they want them, whatever that means. I don't know who I'm calling out, but I'm calling somebody out. The more complex it is, it's almost like you can sure sell a hell of a lot of that stuff.
Of course.
And
everything that I called machine learning 2 years ago is now called AI, and it's not. And in half of them, they already know for a fact, and it's already being reported. In half of them, it's a group of people that are actually doing the work. It's not really AI anything, right? So, or let alone machine learning or
gathering,
anything.
everyone loves that term.
But
gather
it
data,
sounds great in
data.
marketing literature.
I'm not against it, right? It has a place. But so many people are thrusting themselves into this realm of big data that don't know what asset hierarchy is, that don't know their technicians are walking around with adjustable wrenches trying to torque things. Like how it's just mind blowing to me. And people do and achieve everything. And to Howard's point on an aircraft carrier, all of them are important. They all have a very specific thing to do. If the aircraft carrier, like it may happen one day, don't quote me on this, right? But if sensors and stuff were so great, why does an aircraft carrier just have a whole bunch of people maintaining sensors? Why isn't it just all monitored remotely? No, I know.
Well, no. I mean, there are groups within NAVC and NAVAIR that what they do is they get and they study the stuff. It's a civilian group. I mean, they're run by military, but there's a civilian group because they need continuity. Navy research labs, stuff like that. They actually take this stuff and they look at it and they see if there's an application for it, or they have a problem and they start looking for what civilian solutions are there. That started in the 1990s, right? You had to do COTS, commercial off the shelf, versus specifically built for the military. So they'll look and they'll say, okay, does this have an application, and what's the value of that application? But I tell you what, the military knows, and they guarantee they know, there's nothing that outdoes the sensor of a human being. And I don't care how good your marketing team is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. The discussions I get in it. Well, we could have had this sensor, this visual sensor detect that. It's like, no, I'm sorry. The combination of sight, smell, and hearing would not, is not replicable in a device, because you don't have a device that does it all and that could think like a human being. They're all linear. Even as far as you go into AI, and technically what it is still a table. It's just a complicated table. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Finally, there it is. I mean, and you get into neural networks, and it's just a table determined by percentage.
I'm thinking in my head right now, Greg, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm the wrong guy to be talking about that.
Yeah. No, I think.
Sorry. I've been doing this for decades. I mean, I heard, oh my gosh, we've got digital twins. I go, we were doing that in the 1990s,
because then it challenges us to think and all that. So I want to bring it back to, Veterans Day, and again, I've said it more than once.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for your service, because there's a lot of different ways to cut that, but huge sacrifices Bryan talked about, like even somebody that just enlists. I mean, come on, man, that's a hell of a commitment, and a lot of us out here are really appreciative. Even the people that might not be, deep down they are, because they'd be speaking another language otherwise, right? Yeah, and we great
said that.
Yeah. There's no calling in sick for work.
Here, I want to ask a couple of, I usually do some fun questions, so I've been thinking about it. I didn't write these ones out. So the first one, and you both provide answers. Bryan, when it comes to maintenance, what you've experienced in your military experience, your military days, can you give me one example of the worst injury you ever saw because somebody, we can't talk about your pinkies, because somebody screwed up on a maintenance best practice? They didn't follow it.
Yes. So there's a machine in the hangar bay, not on the flight deck, in the hangar bay. Hangar bay is where all the shops are. It's where a lot of maintenance is performed on aircraft and things like that. All the shops kind of surround the hangar bay, if you will. There's a machine called a spotting dolly. And a spotting dolly is a hydrostatic machine that has a Detroit 53 series 3-cylinder engine on its inside of it, so it can be really low. And it has aircraft tires on it. It uses literal aircraft tires that are like, someone's going to correct, like 300 PSI or some crazy number, right? Well, an aircraft tire is pretty heavy. I mean, they're only like this big. So it has 2 drive wheels that are chain driven by 2 hydrostatic motors, right? And then it has a caster wheel on the back that kind of just freeze, does its own thing because it's using the forward wheels to turn and pivot on a dime, right? It's called a spotting dolly. It's for moving aircraft about the hangar bay. So I don't know the verbatim process, but we were changing the caster wheel. The caster wheel, the rubber had met its depth specification and needed to be replaced. So instead, we don't mount and dismount tires. There was a tire shop, aircraft tire shop, that did all that for us. So we pull the whole assembly off and we reinstall a new one. Well, this caster it's a fork, right? Just a regular caster with a wheel in the middle with a pin. Well, this wheel is like 190, 200 pounds. So what you do is there's a procedure for cribbing the machine that brings the caster off the ground so you can free spin it. And there's a pin that's held into it. It's got a castle nut on the end. I don't know if anybody knows what a castle nut is. It's a nut that allows a cotter pin to be put through it. So you take that out, and then there's this little wedge that goes on your jack that goes and cups the tire. So it kind of holds the tire like this. So when you do drive that pin out, the tire stays still when you lower it to the ground. Okay. Well, they took the tire, they used it, they took the tire off. Okay. Then they went to put the new one up. This person put their fingers in the fork and the tire to see if it was lined up. And that wheel was not on that cup all the way. And it fell and sheared their first part of their finger off.
Wow. Scared Howard right out of here.
It's a tight, it's a tight fit, right? I mean, there's not a lot of mechanical looseness in this assembly. So they put their finger in there and it fell through and nipped the part of their finger off.
Brutal.
It says very clearly, I mean, just common knowledge in maintenance is pinch points and things. You don't put your fingers and stuff to where you wouldn't put something else, right? And it says very clearly in the writing, like the alignment is done with a flashlight and the pin. So you're going to like look in the hole, adjust the jack, attempt to put the pin in. And then if it goes, then you're good, right? But you use a light to look through to check your bore alignment. Well, they didn't do that. They put their finger in there and sure as shit, it fell and jacked them up.
And then for you, Howard, do you have a brief story about a situation where you saw some kind of an injury or, a catastrophic outcome that could have been avoided with somebody just following their best practices?
Yeah, it was actually a flight deck injury. A flight deck death. We had an individual on we were coming back into port. He was getting out in a couple of days. So right after we came in port, that was his intent. And he wasn't paying attention. And this is where I say attention to detail is a big deal in military vessels. The most dangerous environment in the world is an aircraft carrier flight deck, especially when you're not paying attention and turn around and walk into a turning propeller. So, it was pretty messy. It was caught on our TVs at the time were black and white, but so everybody on the ship that was near a TV got to see it.
The CCTV system.
Yeah. But attention to detail, critically important.
So to add to that real quick, when they're spotting propped aircraft and they park propped aircraft, they actually put up a cone perimeter around the prop, and a prop is an arc, right? So sometimes there's a whole procedure on how you place these cones because you have to be able to compensate for the arc. Because if you're just walking by and you have a cone down here, right? Well, the arc could be out here. So technically you still have a cone there, but the arc of the propeller is still exposed. And when I was working around propped aircraft, it was like, ugh, like I don't want to go near propped aircraft, especially when they're starting them up. Cause like there's all people, avionics guys are all around. They got the MSU plugged into it and all this crap. And I'm just like, nope, too scary. Cause you can barely see them. Like the blade starts spinning. You can barely see it. Yeah, you can barely see it.
Scary stuff. So now I want to switch it to Veterans Day. So for each of you, just a quick little bit of insight on what it means to you. And we're going to start with you, Bryan.
what does Veterans Day mean to me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I come from a long line of veterans. My mother's father was in the Navy. His father was in the Italian Navy. My father was in the Navy and the Army. His father was in the Navy. My brother or my uncles were in the Navy, a Seabee and a gunner's mate during Vietnam. I am in the Navy. Veterans Day to me is tradition. It is recognizing the courage of an individual to disassociate themselves with self and align with a bigger thing. And I think that it's underappreciated sometimes, right? That, people who write this blank check I keep talking about, but it's real deal. Like Howard said, there's a guy who now is not around. He's might have a family. He signed a blank check, and before you know it, he's gone, right? And that's not even war. Like, you're not even in like firefight, right? I just think that it's tradition. For me, it's tradition. That's cool to be a part of such a long line of tradition. I mean, the sea stories, being a shellback, we didn't talk about that, but like crossing the equator a million times, going from a polywog to a shellback. It's just wild. Every Navy person you talk to in varying generations has this whole cool perspective on what was okay then and what's okay now and what's okay in the future. And it's just wild. That, to me, it's tradition.
Awesome. I like it. And there's a term I'm reminded of. And for anybody out there, you could go online and just on Wikipedia, you can get a ton of insight if you want to look through those, 1,000 or so slang terms specifically from the United States Navy. So I believe there's also a golden shellback.
I am a golden shellback.
And that means not only have you crossed the equator, but you've at the exact same time crossed the international date line.
Well, the parallels, right? You cross at the intersections. Yeah.
Yep.
Got it. So now for you, Howard, what does Veterans Day mean to you?
Well, see, my father was in the Canadian Navy. I was in Canadian Air Cadets before moving to the States. And then Navy, and then my younger brother, who's also in maintenance and reliability. He was when he went in just when they restarted 10th Mountain, so he was light infantry. So yeah, and then in the past beyond that, long line of British military. But I always saw Veterans Day as a way of helping people remember that there's people that are there that help set our freedom, that sacrifice their freedom for that period of time, because you're owned by the government for that period. You have no rights. You've signed them over for that period of time. And, recognizing that sacrifice and the necessity for it being there, being a country that has an ocean on both sides and friendlies north and south, we don't necessarily understand the importance of that, of the military maintaining our way of life, right? So I always see it as a way of celebrating those who are either in service, have left service, or have passed because of service.
Yeah, and this is important. There's going to be a lot of people talking about it, and I think they should. And I like talking about it. And sure, there's bad stuff that happens, but there's people that say, "Hey, I'm going to sign here, and I'm stepping up for that bad stuff." It's the way I look at it, and I have an immense amount of respect for it because you pay the ultimate price in many different ways. So, again,
for that big paycheck.
Yeah. Well, that's another episode in and of itself,
yeah.
Right? So one more kind of fun question. I'm going to ask you, Howard, because Bryan and I talked about this a little bit. You know what a bilge is? Yeah. What is bilge juice?
You're going to ask me these things, and I really don't remember.
It's fine. I didn't know either, Howard.
Yeah.
So apparently, Bilge juice is a mixture, and it is a mixture of. I'm going to cheat. So I'm looking at something you guys can't see on screen right now, and I'm going down to. Oh, we got the blue shirt. We got the blue jackets. Where's my Bilge juice? Where are you? There it is. Bilge Juice is a non-sanctioned alcoholic beverage created while on long deployments by mixing yeast, water,
We won't talk about the rewind shop.
and sugar.
We had the largest hidden storage area on the ship.
I've
We didn't have to make that stuff. We just brought it on.
I hear you. I hear you. I've heard some stuff that there's plenty of stuff we can't talk about on the podcast, and
Yeah.
It's a bit good of it's a bit of good fun, but we know that some of that stuff can get out of hand too.
And what was acceptable then is not acceptable now too.
Certainly.
My father had a beard in the Navy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he didn't have. That was all because they wanted to spend money on that one company for the SCBAs that fit around the mouth.
Right. And talking about bilge juice, like I was on deployment I was forward deployed, so we were always at sea. 9 months of every year we were at sea. I was on deployment so long, we got a beer day. They literally flew beer from Australia onto our carrier and let everybody have 2 beers in the hangar bay. They locked off the hangar bay. There was only one way in, one way out. And when you come in, you were given 2 beers. And when you went out, security or MPs, they would walk you to your rack, and you were done for you were done for the day. You couldn't do anything else. Well, unfortunately for me, no fly days meant maintenance, and I did not get to participate in that beer day. But yeah, I think it was 120 days consecutively at sea or something like that. Someone can correct me. There's like an actual thing, it's an actual thing for the Navy. Like once you've gone so many days on deployment out to sea, they'll do a beer day. I forget how many days it is, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's in there.
We didn't have that. We didn't have that in my time, but they did allow. Because let's see, I missed the transition from drinking age of 21 to from 18 to 21 by 1 month. So the nice thing was when you went into the Navy, you could access on the base. You could access the clubs there, and you just had to be a service member.
Huh? Yeah, it was 21.
Yeah.
In Pensacola. I went there for A school. And for aircraft firefighting school. And I turned 21 there, and you weren't allowed to drink unless you were 21.
Yeah. No, we're talking about the 80s. They literally changed the national drinking age from 18 to 21.
Yeah, I remember that because I was like, damn it.
Yeah, I missed it by 1 month. I was like, son of a gun.
Well, gentlemen, this has been brilliant. I appreciate the time. I appreciate your service. And for anybody that wants to get in touch with Bryan Bieschke, you can find him on LinkedIn, but you can also visit alignmachinecompany.com. And if you happen to be in Maryland, Pennsylvania, or Delaware, and you have heavy equipment repair and maintenance needs, reach out to Align Machine Company. Not only do they do the right work, they do it the right way. And they're not there just to heist you or anything like that. So, serious. Reach out to them. Get in touch with Bryan. Now, if you want to reach Howard, LinkedIn is also a great way. But you can also visit MotorDoc.com and connect with MotorDoc LLC. Because, Howard, you are the MotorDoc. One last question for you, Howard. What is the heaviest weight you ever put up?
In bench?
Yep.
In competition, 531.
What about out of competition?
600.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's some serious weight.
Yeah.
Now we got some forearms.
Oh, that's
going
a
on
forearm
here.
thing. Yeah.
What about the
Arm
thumb
wrestler.
muscle? Show us the thumb muscle. Look at that. He's still evolving. I mean that in the nicest possible way.
I can't bench
give
press.
That man a wrench.
I can't bench press anything, but I have turned a lot of wrenches, and I like to arm wrestle.
Yep.
Oh, man. Oh, that's right. We're going to talk about that on the next episode, so you can teach us how to go over the top.
That started in the Navy, Greg.
Really?
Yeah.
Gotta do something.
A lot of free time on your hands, and a lot of really pumped up dudes, right, with a lot of pent up energy, you know.
And where was the gym on your you were CVN 73, right?
Yeah, I never went to the gym. We had a pull-up bar in the hangar bay, so I went to the hangar bay. Just did pull-ups.
Yeah, the gym on an aircraft carrier is right where the wheels touch. So I started my lifting career in the Navy, and people say, "Why don't things disturb you when you're lifting in competition?" I said, "Because have you ever had an aircraft landing on you while you're bench pressing?"
Yeah, and my bed was between catapults 1 and 2.
There you go. Oh my gosh.
So I sleep like a rock.
Yeah.
That's crazy, guys. Again, thank you. Rock on. Appreciate it. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit cmmsradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.